Okay, you're good whenever you're ready.
Okay. It's really awesome. Is it good?
Yeah, you're good.
That's me being humble.
Now, I thought the roomies was the girls were supposed to ask the guys.
No, it's great.
That's next semester.
This is the guys
So it's
asking.
green at 13, right?
Yeah, green at 13, yellow at 15, red at 17.
Cool. Okay, good.
All right, well, good morning. It's so good to be here with you guys preaching this morning. I've been so enjoying going through the story of Genesis and the life of Joseph. I think everyone here has been doing a great job. But my chapter, we'll be going into, it's 48. It's Jacob blesses, the blessing of Jacob to his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. I don't know about you guys. Any of you guys have a little brother? Growing up, we can raise hands. I have a little brother. My little brother's name is Jordan. Him and I now have a great relationship, but growing up, we did not have the best of relationships. See, Jordan, in my opinion, I'm sure all you guys feel exactly the same, was always the favorite child, man. Jordan could do no wrong. If you know my little brother, man, he is he's the smartest one in the entire family. He's the kid that had a 4.0 all the way through. We just moved him to college like 2 weeks ago. He could go wherever he wanted to go. In addition to that, he was really good at drama. He kind of found his place doing drama and things like that. So he was like the lead in his school dramas. And then beyond that, he's also a really good musician. And I'm like an all-right musician. So that was always a little bit of conflict between us. He can play like 4 instruments. And he's just the kid that can hear a piece of music and play one. So for me, I also had a perfect older sister, and so there was always this conflict where I was being an idiot and rebelling and all this stuff. And so this is kind of a little bit of a story, because I always felt, in the same way I think most younger brothers, or most older brothers think, that the younger kind of always gets priority. And this is kind of a story about a younger brother getting a priority. We're going to start right off in Genesis 48. As we know, throughout everyone else's sermon, this has kind of come to the end of Jacob's life at this point in the story. Now, we know the whole thing about Joseph getting sold into slavery. We know that his brothers betrayed him. We know now that Joseph has arisen to power in Egypt, and because of that, Jacob and his entire family have been saved. And so at this point, Jacob is kind of near the end of his life. He's lived a long, full life. And so we come into it, and right in verse 1, it says this. Now after this, Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is ill." So he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and he was told to Jacob, "Your son Joseph has come to you." Then Israel summoned his strength up and sat up in bed. See, Israel has lived a long and full life. And so when it first gets told to Joseph that, man, your father is ill, your father is sick, there's a genuine need and a genuine urgency about him. Because in that culture, the blessing of the father was very important. See, the way we have to kind of begin to understand is, see, in an American culture, we place a very high value on the ability to start from scratch, the ability through hard work and through effort and through perseverance, that if you work hard, you can make something of yourself. In an ancient culture like that, that's a lot less of a possibility because there's not widespread education and things like that. And a lot of wealth is not in terms of cash, and also that in terms of possession. So the way that a person would receive an inheritance, whether it be from their father or through their family, meant a lot about the way that their life was going to go. And so at this point, there's not a whole lot more important than receiving Jacob's blessing over these 2 sons. And so as we go on through this passage, Joseph and his 2 sons walk into the room, and Israel kind of summons up his strength and sits up in bed. The 2 sons get brought in, and Jacob, Israel, in this passage kind of goes on and talks about God meeting him in Canaan and promising the blessing of the land to him as we go on in this passage. And basically what he goes on to say is that because most scholars think it was because of this, is because Rachel, who is Jacob's favorite wife, we know from reading on earlier in Genesis, because Rachel is Jacob's favorite wife of the 4 people that he had, Joseph was her son, and so Joseph's 2 grandchildren, Israel basically decides to adopt them as his own sons. It says that basically in the passage it says that in the same way that Reuben and Simeon, who we know are 2 of Israel's sons, are his sons, it says that Ephraim and Manasseh will also be brought in and they will be sons. And most scholars think he kind of did this as a favor to Rachel. As we read on in chapter 7, or in verse 7, the reason why scholars think that is because he kind of throws this random story in about Rachel, saying, it says this in verse 7, "As for me, when I came from Paddan, to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan on the way, while she was still some distance to go to Ephrath, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrath," that is Bethlehem. And so this kind of goes on, and so amazing thing happens in this room for these two sons. It says in verse 8, when Israel saw Joseph's son, he said, "Who are these?" And so as I read this passage, I tend to think that Jacob probably had not had a ton of contact with his two grandsons. Now, this could have been for a lot of reasons. It's a very different culture in Israel. That's where in Israel at that time, and especially beyond that, they're in Egypt. They're in a different land. They're in Goshen, away from that. And because of Joseph's place in the court, he was in Egypt. He was a governor of Egypt. So for whatever the reason, there has not been a ton of contact between Ephraim and Manasseh, clearly shown by verse 8, when Israel doesn't even basically know who his sons is, and so who these two kids are that walk in this room. And so the way I kind of look at it is like, man, that's a huge blessing. Like, obviously Ephraim and Manasseh at that point, their father is the governor of Egypt, so they're kind of doing it. They're kind of like, living a little bit of a good life. But more than likely, it has not been promised to them that an entire land is going to be theirs. So it's kind of like that Wheel of Fortune moment, like where they win. They're like, okay, like, whoa, this blessing, like, what's going on here? Like, I'm like, going to be included in this blessing for an entire nation. Like, what does that even mean? And so even Manasseh at this point kind of hit like the lottery in a lot of sense. And so we come in on this epic, like, end of life death scene. I think about like a movie, there's like an organ playing in it, and Jacob's like sitting up in bed, like about to bless his sons. And so what we quickly realize in this passage is that, and I think it's honestly true for a lot of us, is there is an expectation on the way this blessing should go. It's actually kind of ironic that there is this expectation when they walk in, because Jacob, if you remember the story, Jacob basically tricked his father into blessing him. And so the fact that Joseph, his son, thinks there's a way should be blessing is very ironic, because we come in with a preconceived notion of the way a blessing should work. And that is, in that sense, in that culture, that the firstborn has the birthright. Not because of anything they've done or anything that they really earned, except for the fact that they were born first. And so therefore they get the entire blessing. And so we read in verse 13, and it says this, "And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near to him." See, what we quickly realize in this passage, that Joseph has a kind of idea of how this is going to go. Maybe Joseph has heard stories about the way this works, or maybe we're not really sure if he has heard of the way that Jacob received his blessing. But at this point, Joseph comes in with this notion, okay, this is how this is about to go down. You guys, I don't know if you had a conversation with Ephraim and Manasseh beforehand, but he's like, yo, you're going to go up, and you're going to give it, and Grandpa Israel is going to lay his right hand on you, and you're going to get that blessing. And, Grandpa Israel's going to lay his left hand on you, Ephraim, and, you're going to get a blessing still, but it's not going to be as good as Manasseh's. And I think very quickly as I was studying this passage, I found myself really identifying with that. I think a lot of times I walk into situations with God, and we walk into situations with God, and we think, God, this is the way this is going to go down. This is the way, I've done this, I've worked to this point, I've worked this hard, and so God, I'm expecting you to bless me in this way. We very quickly realize in this story that's not always the way it goes down, which I think that for all of us, we've been in a very similar place. In verse 17 it says this, it goes on in verse 14. "Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands for Manasseh was the firstborn." And later, and as we go on in this passage, he goes through a blessing which basically includes Ephraim and Manasseh into the line. It says, "The God of our fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, I am now including you in this blessing, and you shall be a part of this great nation which God has promised to our family." And so we read into verse 17, "And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. And he took his father's hand to move from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head." How often is that how we choose to kind of react to God's blessing? God, this displeases me. I don't think this should go this way. God, you should probably do this thing. Going back to this, me and my brother Jordan. Growing up, Jordan and I were, honestly, we fought like cats and dogs constantly. If you see my brother now, he's like 6'3", he's like an inch taller than me. We have completely different body types. He looks like kind of athletic, his broad shoulders, and I, look like this, so it is what it is. But at that age in our life, so most of the time growing up, people used to think we were twins because we looked almost exactly alike. And he kind of hit a growth spurt early, and it took me a really long time to get tall. And so for most of our lives, we were basically the same height. So people always thought, oh, John and Jordan are twins when we first go places. My parents would be like, no, John's 4 years older than him. Don't do his face. They don't look that much alike. And so my brother and I used to fight all the time. But something happened when I got into junior high. I got really into baseball. I started playing through spring and summer and doing select league in the summertime, and then starting in the fall doing select league. And so you kind of start to, get a little bit bigger. You kind of start to do some workouts a little bit. And so I got a little bit taller also as we entered into junior high. And so my brother and I Still had the same posture. We wrestle and fight all the time, but I started to get a little bit stronger. And so I came home one day from baseball practice, and I was so tired, so exhausted. It had been raining, pouring down rain, and my brother and his friends were over there playing video games, and I remember being so frustrated because it was so loud, and so I'd gone to my room. My room is right above our living room in my parents' house, and so they were so loud. I'd gone downstairs, I was like, Jordan, go outside, it's so loud in here, I can't sleep. And he's like, okay, okay. And so they go outside, and so I'm like just at that point, you know, in your bed, starting to fall asleep, and I hear some tapping on my window. And my brother and his friends have taken this tree branch and are hitting my window, and something erupts inside of me. I come running downstairs. At my parents' house, we have a gigantic backyard, and there's woods right on the end of the thing. And so I'm running after Jordan as fast as I can. He's got a head start on me. I eventually catch up to him, and for the first time in my entire life, and it's the only time ever this has happened since, I wind up and punch my brother as hard as I can in the face, and he hits the ground cold. And so I'm like, yes, victory. I'm a little bit freaked out because I've never done this to someone before. I've never really been in a fight before at this point, and I see my brother hit the ground. At this point in my life, just so you guys know, I had long hair down to my shoulders, and so I'm sitting here like victory, and I feel my hair get ripped back like this, and I get slapped across the face. See, I think some of us are in this place, and I don't know exactly, but I can kind of tell just from skin color. How many people have not white parents? I'm one of them. My mom is Japanese, and I'm going to be really honest, not white parents have no problem hitting their kids. So my mom, as soon as she saw this happen, saw me running after my brother, comes across, and my mom pulls my hair, slaps me across the face for doing that. I'm like 13 years old, my mom is beating me, and I'm like, Mom, this isn't fair, Jordan woke me up, I don't understand why. And in this process, I'm telling my mom, I'm saying, Mom, I did not deserve this. Jordan woke me up. I was asleep. He deserves to be on the ground right now. The reason why I tell that story is I think many times we kind of take this mindset into the way we think God is going to bless us. See, unintentionally we take a human concept of this American capitalist idea and we remove grace from the concept of blessing. See, so often we look at life, and even if it's unintentionally, even after being saved, we look at blessing and we say, okay, God, if I work hard, I should get more money. You know, if I don't do crimes, I shouldn't be in jail. And unintentionally, we move this same mindset, even after the cross, even after us receiving grace, we take that mindset into blessing. And we're like, okay, God, if bad things happen, if I do bad things, Lord, if I don't tithe, I expect my finances to be in ruin. So the reality of this blessing is that Manasseh deserved the firstborn inheritance. And yet Jacob crosses his arms. And so quickly, I don't want to identify with Manasseh. I want to say, okay, yeah, that's weird. That doesn't make sense. You know, I wouldn't do that. It makes sense that God would do that. But the reality is that a lot of times I take that same mindset into the way God chooses to bless the people that I see. I think that, okay, if, you know, this person does good, God, if I'm, you know, not on drugs, if I'm not drinking, God, if I'm doing all of these things, then I expect, Lord, that I should get a blessing. God, if I work hard in all my classes, Lord, if I serve in a church, if I keep my finances in check, if I keep my purity in check, Lord, I'm hoping to get a job after college. The reality is that we all come to is that in the same way that Ephraim was blessed instead of Manasseh by Jacob crossing his arms, God has done the same thing to us through grace. We remember passages like Romans chapter 5, and it says that, man, when we were yet Christ's enemies, He died for us. I love another translation of that passage, Romans chapter 5. It says, while we hated God, He still chose to give His life for us. The reality of this passage is this, is there's something going on here that is bigger than Ephraim and Manasseh. As you continue on in the story, what has occurred, the reason why Ephraim is blessed before Manasseh, there's a lot of debate as to exactly why it happened. But as you read on the story in Joshua, when Israel eventually does enter as a nation after the Exodus, after they leave Egypt, hundreds of years later, Ephraim, the tribe of Ephraim, plays a huge role in them coming into the Promised Land. You know, and as we go on, it's this, and it says, and Joseph said to his father, and it says it's in 18, and Joseph said to his father, not this way, my father, since this one is the firstborn, put your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his offspring shall also be, nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. So the reality of this is that this is kind of my final challenge for this, and it honestly seems super elementary and seems very basic, but this is kind of what I realized in this passage, is that God's blessing is God's blessing. God gets to put that blessing on whoever He wants to in order that His plan may succeed. And although we might not want to understand that, we might not want to receive that all the time, God kind of gets to bless people however He feels like. So my challenge for us this morning is this, is that, man, if we would like to respond to that and just say, God, your blessing is your blessing, I don't always have to understand it. I'd love for us to do this morning. Let's pray.
Time, Brandon?
15 minutes exactly.
15 exactly. And what you can do, Brandon, if you want, is flip the camera so you got a handle behind you in case somebody's walking around.
It's like right like this.
Oh, no, I meant like turn the whole camera unit. Well, yeah, you would want to do that anyway, to have the handle behind.
Yeah.
And then
flip it like that.
Take that thing, yeah. In case the shelf decides to wander around the platform. Get physically engaged.
Wait, is the projector on?
Yeah, should be.
Okay.
Keep right rolling. And if you want to turn out the bank of lights, you can do that. So we're by the door.
What? What?
Exactly. Not you.
Sorry.
Say hello to students, but
Hit the blank.
Hit the light?
It should say blank.
Oh, okay.